This is not the first video I thought I was going to make, but welcome to the Beautiful Game Show. I am Gabe, the American, and we're not going to do the algorithm stuff or the intro credits today. We're just going to jump right into it. But before I do that, I want to give a slight preamble as to what to expect. So if you're triggered by things like this, maybe you can avoid it. This content's going to differ a lot from the usual fare. I mean, I'm hoping that this isn't going to turn into a channel that has to address this that often. But as a content creator, if we see things that have become systemic and a central concern in the sport that we love, I think it's intentional negligence and burying one's head in the sand to not address it. So one of my commitments to this channel is to be honest and to always keep it real. And I'm going to do that to the best of my ability. This work and the stuff I'm talking about is heavily reliant on good journalism, and these sources are cited here. Without further ado, let's get into it because it's going to be a bumpy ride. I'd hang on to your hat. So where to begin? I think we have to start with what's happening with the Spanish FA right now. For those of you that don't know, Spain just won the Women's World Cup. Exceptional team. One of the most talented women's teams I've ever seen, and many people have ever seen. And to be honest, it's kind of a miracle that they won. This story begins, not chronologically, but just for the sake of having a condensable video, with a coach, as things often do. And this coach's name is Jorge Vilda. Vilda has spent the last 12 years as a manager working for the Spanish FA in women's football. His father, Angel Vilda, spent a long career in Spanish football as well. Angel was the U19 Spanish women's manager, while his son started a career as a U17 manager. Because nepotism is great for federation health. That's always true. 4 years later, Jorge Vilda took over the U19s after his father retired. A year later, Jorge Vilda was named manager of the women's side. Carrera was sacked after a rebellion in the dressing room. Now, when we say rebellion in the dressing room, we don't mean like, hey, we kind of don't like this guy. We mean like, hey, this guy is abusive and terrible. Do the research for yourself. Look it up. It's everywhere. It's not hard to find out why this guy sucked and why the players wanted him gone. But just in case you need some reminding, in 2021, Carrera was accused of harassment and abuse by some of his former international footballers. There was a documentary made about it. It's horrible. It's disgusting. Go check it out. So Jorge Vilda, the person that replaced this guy, isn't just the manager, but he's also the technical director of women's football and one of the strongest voices in the Spanish FA. Nothing like a nepotism hire being given almost absolute power. This kind of stuff doesn't happen very often in the men's game. Why do you think it happens in the women's game? Anyway, let's not even get into that. Let's just keep going. So Vilda's relationship with many of Spain's senior players and most notable and talented players has been pretty rocky for a long time. And when I say rocky, I mean just putrid, not good. But this isn't just an issue of clashing personalities. Let's make that very, very clear. Until 2019, Vilda had a rule that players could not lock their doors or hotel rooms at night on international duty. You're a man managing a team of women and you're telling them they're not allowed to lock their hotel room doors. What? It gets better. Well, not better. It gets worse. They had to wait until this guy came to their rooms individually, closed the door and locked it, and said, okay, everything's fine. Are you kidding me? Not even allowed basic privacy in a hotel room is sort of like, I don't know. If you sent your kids to a camp and they were in cabins and there was this one guy who, by the way, had a bad reputation with kids that insisted they keep their doors open and they couldn't have privacy until he individually came around and said, okay, now you can go to sleep. I'm telling you, that absolutely dysfunctionally weird, unprofessional, and in a working environment for adults in 2023. Add to that key players have pointed out that lack of tactical knowledge and analysis that they found amongst this guy's backroom staff, insufficient physical preparation, poor quality of training sessions. The list goes on and on and on. During international break after the Euros they crashed out of, the Spanish team, the women decided to book a meeting with Luis Rubiales, the FA president. Heard that name before? You're going to hear it again, unfortunately. The intention of the meeting was to let them know that they were very uncomfortable by their manager. They don't feel well represented by him, and they felt they could do a lot better. They had some real concerns. They didn't ask for him to be sacked, but they asked for some intervention on behalf of the FA. That's kind of what you do. If you're having an issue with your boss and you can't work it out with your boss, you go to the skip level. In this case, that's the FA. The request for this meeting was led by the team captain and 2 dressing room leaders. One of them was a player named Hermoso. Recognize that name? You will. So Rubiales, it says he's not going to sack Vilda, and then leaks the news to the Spanish press, and it quickly escalates. Soon after, the footballers have to organize their own press conference and say, okay, this is our side of the story, because the FA decided to basically castigate their own players. Real professional. Nothing says we're here to support the team like having a private meeting with them and then leaking the details, forcing the players to then come out with their side of the story. Great professionalism, Spain. And don't worry, this isn't some weird nationalistic thing because US Soccer, I'm coming for you next. Don't worry, you're in this video. Vilda comes out with his own reply. He says, I was hurt by the way the players behaved. They went beyond any dressing room code in football. What happens in the dressing room stays in the dressing room and gets resolved there. I wonder if he means dressing room like their hotel rooms at night up until midnight, because apparently this guy thinks he has carte blanche to everything that happens with the team. The FA announced that the players who don't accept a national call-up would be considered at severe fault and could face sanctions of between 2 to 5 years to not be considered for selection. So it got so bad with this guy that 15 players came forward. Their names are listed in numerous reports, but I can paste it here if you want, and said, listen, we're not comfortable with this guy. We don't feel comfortable playing for him. Please help. And it got to the point where they're like, we're not going to accept a call-up because it's so creepy and weird with this dude. And the Spanish FA is like, well, if you don't accept a call-up, we're going to ban you. So imagine you're being harassed at work and mistreated, and you go to your boss's boss, or you go to your HR department, and you say, listen, I don't feel comfortable coming in and working for this guy. That's how bad it's gotten. Can we figure something out? And they say, listen, tough luck. On top of that, if you make any stink about this, or if you don't come to work, we're going to fire you. Imagine then HR retaliates against you for subsequently bringing your concerns to light. It's unbelievable. It's unconscionable. And to be honest, I want to say it's shocking, but if you've been following the women's game, you know it's not that shocking. So just to review real quick, the guy that they got to replace the last harasser and abuser is also harassing and potentially abusing these players in one way or another, and the Spanish FA's response is to tell them to shut the hell up. So these 15 internationals speak out through a statement on their social media channels. The players come out and say, by no means have we quit the national team. Our commitment to the national team remains the same. They said they never demanded the sacking of Vilda. It is not our job, they said. However, they expressed in a reflective and honest way, that's a quote, their concerns and ideas to improve. Hermoso comes out and says, I want to publicly express my unconditional support to my teammates who a few days ago decided to communicate the need to improving working conditions. Not only do I understand their reasons, but I've also experienced many of the same feelings and concerns. Vilda doesn't select Hermoso after that. Here's where the gaslighting gets really intense. Vilda comes out with a statement that says, if you don't value what it means to be with the national team, wear this shirt and represent your country, you don't deserve to be with us. It's quite the statement. You know, it's an interesting tactic to come out and say, if you don't value being with the national team, and that's sort of like your hidden code for being subject to my every whim, desire, and unprofessional practice, then you don't know what it means to appreciate the shirt. I mean, that's like kerosene level gas. So the Spanish FA reiterates at the time that it's going to back Vilda. Vilda has a very strong relationship with Rubiales. We'll talk about him later because he is a subject of controversy now. All this happens less than 9 months before the World Cup. So you have 15 players that are like, this is toxic and bad, and please help us, or we don't want to come to play. And then the FA is like, well, screw you, you don't care about Spain. So let's fast forward. Spain, with a manager whose tactics are in question, who has no connection to the players, who has engaged in inappropriate activity to say the least, Spain somehow managed to win the Women's World Cup. That's how talented this generation of players are. Imagine if they had a better manager. It's kind of unbelievable. Talk about resiliency. Anyway, so let's talk about Luis Rubiales, president of the Spanish Soccer Federation. He is now facing criticism for kissing player Jenny Hermoso on the lips without consent after the Women's World Cup final. There is a special term for that, by the way, because I'm reading an article right now, FYI. And if you remember, rewind if you need to, Hermosa was one of the players that expressed extreme concern about the coach. So to grab and forcefully kiss her, again, name for that above, if you can't see that that's a clear, disgusting abuse of power and a flex over a player that has absolutely nothing and no recourse for what they can do in the moment, essentially to prove, hey, look who's in charge. It's an unbelievably dehumanizing and disgusting action. And let's be clear, this is unacceptable under any set of circumstances. But when you add the context of what's been happening over the past couple of years and in this federation in general, and what's happened with that player within that context, it becomes even worse. So Rubiales has refused to resign despite calls for his departure, addressing an emergency assembly and asserts, despite what the player has said, that the kiss was consensual. Also, there have been reports that the FA has been pressuring the player to come out and defend him, even though she said, I didn't want it, it was uncomfortable, and I didn't appreciate it. So the Spanish FA is pressuring a player to defend somebody who assaulted them. Are you kidding me? So Rubiales goes and accuses his critics of a witch hunt driven by false feminists. His claim of a consensual kiss receives applause by at least half of the dudes in the room, which is pretty gross, by the way. And then he says that he's going to give Vilda a new contract for $500,000 a year. These guys are literally peeing on the proverbial trees that they think the women are. And it's disgusting. It's disgusting and reprehensible behavior. And honestly, like, it's not funny. I know I'm trying to bring some humor to this, but it's not funny. It's horrific. Take a moment to Google Rubiales' comments just around and during this entire tournament and his behavior. Yeah. There's not a lot you can say about it besides that this guy's disgusting and he's let his true colors show. But remember, this is FIFA, this is UEFA, and this is the Spanish FA, and this is the women's game. Do we expect any accountability? No. The Spanish FA, of course, downplayed the incident. It should be mentioned that the Spanish FA have denied any accusation that they've been pressuring the player, and all of the allegations by the 15 players against the coach have been denied, and that the previous coach has denied the accusations against him. Can you imagine winning a World Cup and being forced to deal with this? Perhaps the most laughable, FIFA has opened up their own separate investigation because those are always super effective. Thanks for virtue signaling, FIFA. I could just see Infantino right now channeling Sepp Blatter once they say cleared of all charges and chanting, "Let's go FIFA." Or maybe he's going to tell the women to just push on a different door. Spain's High Council of Sports has referred complaints to the Administrative Court for Sports, hinting at possible consequences. Let's hope those are actually more effective than a FIFA case. Women's national coach Jorge Vilda and men's coach Luis de la Fuente have supported Rubiales' decision to remain defiant. Super shocking. It's a lot more disappointing with Luis de la Fuente because he is in a much more powerful position than Vilda, but I guess it's not surprising. I mean, participants in systems of power like this tend to be complicit, if not outright enabling. So it's an evolving situation. I wish it stopped there. Let's talk about U.S. soccer because this is pretty bad. Now, a lot has been made over the U.S. women being eliminated from the World Cup in its first elimination game against Sweden. But to be honest, they'd won 2 World Cups in a row. This is the most successful women's national team program in the world and has been for quite some time. You're going to see that there's a theme in the women's game of teams being resilient and continuing to be successful despite adversity that nobody should have to endure. Let's talk about the Yates Report. Now, the Yates Report is officially known as the Report of the Independent Investigation into the U.S. Soccer Federation concerning allegations of abusive behavior and sexual misconduct in women's professional soccer. Yes, that is the actual title, and yes, it is a pretty gnarly report. So, yeah, this is going to be maybe hard to listen to, so fair warning. The report, led by Sally Yates, was released by the USSF, that's the U.S. Soccer Federation, on October 3rd, 2022. The investigation was prompted by a report by The Athletic in October of 2021 that detailed sexual harassment and coercion allegations against Paul Riley, who is the former manager of the Portland Thorns. I'd be here for hours if I was just talking about the Paul Riley situation and how disgusting that was and how the Portland Thorns defended this guy and didn't get rid of him until they were absolutely forced to by external pressure. So we're not even going to talk about that. We're just going to keep it to the Yates report right now. The investigation that produced the Yates report, this independent commission, reviewed over 89,000 documents. That's pretty extensive. They conducted more than 200 interviews and created a hotline for anonymous reporting. So here are the key findings in a numbered list, and I'm reading for a document, so sorry if my eyes wander, but it's a lot. It's difficult to remember. It's important to get the stuff right. The key findings of the report included these. Number one, a lack of fundamental player safety measures. So what does that mean? These are basics for any business at all. Like, again, I'm going to use a summer camp example, which, by the way, women's professional football is more important and a bigger deal than a summer camp. The fact that the NWSL is run and has been run without the basics of player protection, the basics of like HR departments and things like that is beyond the pale, and it shows just how much of a racket some of this is. Number two, systemic abuse and harassment. Allegations were made against specific coaches, including Christy Holly, Paul Riley, and Rory Dames for sexual harassment, abuse, and emotional misconduct. It's not just them, by the way, but those were the primary names cited in the report. Number three, a key finding, a complete and total inaction by the NWSL and the U.S. Soccer Federation's leadership. The report revealed a lack of response to player complaints by the league and federation leadership, despite multiple reports of abusive behavior. So they heard about it and they did nothing. They didn't even respond in some cases. Number four, enablement of accused coaches. So accused coaches were allegedly allowed to continue working, and there were instances of insufficient responses to reported behavior. Some of them got moved into different jobs after allegations. It's like the Catholic Church. They just take them and move them somewhere else. No offense if you're a Catholic. I grew up close to Boston, so I know all about it. Number five, whistleblower retaliation. So players who reported actual abuse faced retaliation in the form of trades, releases, threats, and other negative consequences. Some of them got benched. Some of them were cut. Imagine reporting abuse and being released from your contract. That's literally what these women were facing and did face. Number six, a lack of job security and protection. Many teams lacked human resource departments. Who do you go talk to? They didn't know. They didn't have anybody. Contributing to a lack of job security for players and enabling retaliation. So there's no one to go to keep people accountable. Awesome. Number seven, obstruction of investigation. Some teams impeded this investigation by hindering access to witnesses and relevant documents. So the USSF did not mandate participation in this investigation. That's something I want to go ahead and say. They commissioned the independent investigation, but cooperation wasn't mandatory. Thanks, U.S. Soccer. Keep doing what you do, I guess. Oh, but the list goes on. Number eight, failed responses encouraging further abuse. So failures to address misconduct enabled further abuse and discouraged reporting. Number nine, the report indicates that the scope extended beyond professional soccer. It suggested that issues of abuse extended into youth soccer due to power imbalances. Youth soccer. Youth women's soccer. And we're not talking about like, this person's a little bit mean to me. We're talking like abuse. The report goes on to make several recommendations, including requiring teams to disclose misconduct, implementing clearer policies, conducting annual training on abuse prevention, strengthening player safety requirements, and reevaluating the leadership at the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. Now, I want to read something directly from the Yates report. This is in the beginning. I'm going to read word for word, so if you want to read it yourself, the link is in the description. You would have thought this would have been all over every single news channel in the United States. It wasn't. But anyway, I'm going to read from the report now. On April 21st, 2021, the head coach of Racing Louisville, Christy Holly, requested that a player, Aaron Simon, attend a game session with him alone. She knew what to expect. When she arrived, she recalled Holly opened his laptop and began the game film. He told her he was going to touch her, quote, for every pass she effed up. He did. Simon reports that he pushed his hands down her pants and up her shirt. She tried to tightly cross her legs and push him away, laughing to avoid angering him. The video ended and she left. When her teammate picked her up to drive home, she broke down crying. Holly is not the only coach to have abused an NWSL player, and Aaron Simon is not the only NWSL player to have been abused. Systemic. Issues like this have been systemic in NWSL and enabled by U.S. Soccer. This is the most successful program in the history of the women's game. So anybody that talks about the Spanish FA and pointing to the Women's World Cup they just won needs to shove it, because it has nothing to do with results. You can get results without, hiring abusers or enabling abusers or defending abusers or hiding behind, I don't really know too much about this. Educate yourself. It's simple. Or engaging in whataboutisms. Let's just engage with an obvious injustice here and say that this is wrong and it's disgusting and do our part to expose it and do our part to put pressure on the powers that be to get this out of the game. The late, great Grant Wall, who was a U.S. soccer reporter that passed away during the Men's World Cup, noted that the Yates report includes, quote, a lot about enablers who were, to some degree, aware of what was going on here and didn't do their job to protect the players. And he mentions that various NWSL owners and U.S. soccer officials could have done a lot more. They didn't do the right thing. It was all about cover your ass. And Grant's right. On September 30th, 2021, The Athletic published an article about Paul Riley, who is one of the most winning coaches in the NWSL. The article was entitled, "This Guy Has a Pattern." Amid institutional failure, former NWSL players accuse prominent coach of sexual coercion. So the article talks about how Riley left the Portland Thorns, it was an NWSL franchise, in 2015 after an investigation of a complaint by a player that Riley sexually pursued for months and benched after she declined his sexual advances. There are going to be people that say, oh, this is why you can't mix men and women. Funny old thing, when you say things like that, you're saying more about yourself than you are about the actual situation. If you think that men and women can't interact professionally without a man or whoever making sexual advances on somebody at work, then I don't know what to tell you. So the league knew about this report and failed to investigate a 2021 complaint filed against Riley by another player, whom Riley coerced into a sexual relationship in a prior professional league. The North Carolina Courage, who by this time were Riley's new team, terminated him. NWSL's commissioner and general counsel resigned within days. So they knew. They knew this was coming, and when it came out, they were like, okay, they've got us. We're out of here. Real ethical, guys. Way to do the right thing. And so players go on to demand more accountability because, once again, the league proved that it failed to protect its own players. By the end of the 2021 season, this is going to be pretty powerful. Half of the NWSL's teams had departed with their head coaches by the end of that year. And it was because of player complaints, stuff like this. Half of the teams dealt with harassment complaints, with sexual coercion complaints. That's an unbelievable ratio. It's so systemic. This is from the Yates report again. Our investigations revealed a league in which abuse and misconduct, both verbal and emotional, and then sexual misconduct, had become systemic, spanning multiple teams, coaches, and victims. Abuse in the NWSL is rooted in a deeper culture in women's soccer, beginning in the youth leagues, that normalizes verbally abusive coaching and blurs boundaries between coaches and players. The verbal and emotional abuse players describe in the NWSL is not merely tough coaching. That's something I want to emphasize, because they understand that there's a difference between being a tough coach and a not tough coach, and they're saying that's not what this is about. This is, again, from the Yates report. The players affected are not shrinking violets. They're among some of the best athletes in the world. They include members of the U.S. women's national team, veterans of multiple World Cups and Olympics tournaments, and graduates of legendary NCAA Division I soccer programs. In well over 200 interviews, we heard report after report of relentless, degrading tirades, manipulation that was about power, not improving performance, and retaliation against those who attempted to come forward. Even more disturbing were the stories of sexual misconduct. Players described a pattern of sexually charged comments, unwanted advances, and touching in coercive sexual intercourse. That's amongst one of the most harrowing reports I've ever read about team sports, and it's happening, and it has happened in one of the most successful programs in the world. Think about the systemic abuse that happened to the U.S. women's gymnastics team as well, and the fact that it took forever for any accountability to be leveled against Larry Nassar because of the protection by systems of power of abuse. And here we go, and I'm going to stop reading from this report in a minute, but I want to emphasize this paragraph here. Teams, the league, and the federation not only repeatedly failed to respond appropriately when confronted with player reports and evidence of abuse of coaches moved from team to team, laundered by press releases thanking them for their service, and positive references from teams that minimized or even concealed misconduct. So the teams didn't sack them, they let them go with recommendations. Those at both the USSF and NWSL in a position to correct the record stayed silent, and no one at the teams, the league or the federation, demanded better of coaches. No one stepped up. No one did anything. So when you see the president of FIFA saying, "Hey, women, just press the door. You've got to do it." There's code in that statement. And this from the report. We had no power to compel compliance from third parties, including teams or coaches, whether for the purpose of collecting documents or conducting interviews. Certain witnesses, including the former commissioner of the NWSL, Jeff Plush, never responded to our outreach. Others refused to be interviewed, some because they feared retaliation. Still others, including former USSF Chief Executive Officer, the CEO of U.S. Soccer, Dan Flynn, agreed only to respond to written questions rather than to sit for an interview. It's the most disgusting abdication of basic decency you will see. Finally, the report says, despite those challenges, our investigation was broad and thorough. Our investigation's most significant sources were the more than 100 interviews with current and former NWSL and national team players who shared their stories with us. So to review, a pattern of systemic abuse across multiple teams that nobody in any position of leadership in either the domestic league or U.S. soccer as a federation decided to address. In fact, they enabled it. And if this problem is that systemic in one of the biggest leagues that's a part of one of the most successful programs in the sport, that's the U.S. women's game, that you can only imagine how systemic this problem is elsewhere. So sadly, it's not that surprising to me that the Spanish FA has a emergency council meeting called, and when the guy in question defends his own assault of a player, they applaud. It's not just equitable pay women are having to fight for right now in this game. It's like being able to play in a league where we're not systemically harassed and assaulted by coaches. It's being able to come into camp without having a manager that requires us to keep our hotel doors open until he comes and says everything meets my satisfaction. It's to have appropriate channels to go to if there's inappropriate conduct being forced upon you. It's to not have a group of men in positions of power in your football association applaud your alleged abuser. It's pretty basic stuff, honestly. This isn't rocket science. This isn't wokeism. This isn't political. This isn't partisan. This is just basic human decency. The least we can do, especially as content creators, if we're covering football, is to shed light on systemic abuses and a culture of inequity. I don't think it's too much to ask for us to care about something that, frankly, is shocking. You shouldn't have to have a wife, a girlfriend, or a sister to feel some kind of empathy here and to be able to say objectively that this is unacceptable. You've got national teams that made this World Cup and did great. I'm thinking of Jamaica right now, who are in open disputes with their FA and aren't even getting paid. You have a women's team over at Sampdoria in Italy who is registered despite the owner saying that he's not going to fund the team. So they're registered to play, they're expected to roll out there, but they don't know if they're going to get compensated for their effort or if they're even going to have jobs going forward. We're not even talking like mid-1900s labor law. We're talking about like early 1900s labor practices we're seeing in the women's game. And it's unacceptable. Nobody should go to work feeling like they can be harassed and they have no recourse for it. That's just kind of a basic expectation. It doesn't matter what gender you are. But it does seem to matter what gender you are because, by and large, we're seeing this in the women's game, not the men's game. So we have to talk about it. And honestly, as unpleasant as it is to talk about, it's necessary. We have to talk about this. And let's do it until things change. Please tune into the other content we have coming on this channel. Hopefully it's going to be a bit more uplifting and less, like, sociologically necessary. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, to the inevitable comments, and I know they're going to come from somebody who says, "Oh, none of these women are going to sleep with you for doing this or for making that video." I'm queer, dude. So, also, does anybody else remember when that one guy threw fake money on Sepp Blatter? Those were the days.